Good morning, everyone. It's super exciting to be here today. It's been a long process, although short. It felt in terms of getting here, but a lot of hard work to get us all here, and super, super excited to be up here with these fantastic folks today. So I thought we'd just start, although I know you guys had a bit of an introduction from Hans, and certainly we have your bios as part of the show run for today. But if you could just start, I'll maybe start with you, Georgette, and just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into film.
So I trained as an actress and had dreams of being a leading lady. But as I'm from the East Side, I was always cast as a hooligan, so I quickly gave that up and met some security guards on set and became the first female security guard in the UK. And then that, led to locations, and I progressed through the department.
I don't know how the hell I got here. I have a degree in geography and environmental science. I was working in the woods of Montana when this little director named Spielberg showed up to make a movie, and I got my first shot of movie heroin, figuratively, not literally, and quit my good old government job with a pension, and moved to Los Angeles after a couple of years, and I'm not sure, I'm the luckiest guy around. I don't know exactly what happened to get me in this position, but I'm really, really lucky. I've worked with some great people, have a great time at my job, and want to retire, but don't know how I can do that because I keep getting these calls for these fantastic jobs. So you might be looking at this mug for a couple more years.
I'm the luckiest guy. I started in Alberta. I grew up in BC, though, born in BC. I started in Alberta, and I think we were just servicing commercials, I guess. I'm not really sure what we were doing. But had the opportunity to move to Vancouver with the godfather of film, Les Kimber, if anyone knows him. And we came here in '86 when there was nothing else happening. And as a matter of fact, where North Shore Studios are today, was an abandoned warehouse called Park and Tilford, which was a whiskey distillery. And we ended up renting that space. And I always remember it was '86, $25,000 a month. We thought, that is like unbelievable amount of money. It's crazy. But we used that abandoned warehouse for that year. And the following year, the deal was done with the folks that owned the land to build studios, and they had a commitment to bring 3 years of series there, and that kicked off, I think, the industry. So really, I have to tell you, I've had a job since 1986. There's been very few downtime in the whole industry, and I started there, and we were able just to continue on, and we're still here, and I would have never imagined in my life that we'd be doing this kind of production, this many shows in this city at this point, and it's unbelievable, and we keep pushing on, so very lucky.
Hi, my name is Robbie. I'm from Belfast, as you know. I was a touring musician for a while. Always had a very strong visual artistic background as well at the same time, so I had photography as a hobby. I decided to stop touring around about 2003 and 4, and pretty much I got a call from a friend of mine who had been to a gig, who asked me if I wouldn't mind driving a van for a couple of weeks, which I said yes to. Very soon I was scouting, and the rest of the 15 years since then has been coinciding with a massive development in Belfast in the film scene, to the point where I got a lot of scouting work and worked with a producer called Mark Huffam, who got me into Game of Thrones and gave me the script in 2008. And the next 10 years after that, I have just been growing and learning the job. So weirdly, this is one of my absolute biggest first jobs. I'm absolutely honored to be on the stage with people with resumes who are 9,000 times bigger than mine. But it was a great learning experience, and thanks so much for having me.
I guess I'd be the third luckiest person here. I was 25 and living the dream. I was working in a record store, living in my parents' basement. And my sister was a second AD, and they had just fired, I believe, the 7th office PA on her show, and what she said to them was, "My loser brother can't be any worse, let's give him a shot." Did that for a while and kind of got a feel, and a location manager by the name of Richard Hughes out of Toronto called me one day and said, "You want to work in locations?" And I went, "What is that?" And he goes, "Well, you explain the job." I went, "You get paid to pick up trash and set up stuff?" And I said yes, and I guess I did well because I keep getting hired. And I keep getting hired, and I'm sitting on a panel with these people here, and this job has afforded me things I never thought I would do. I've traveled most of the world. I've been on panels like this. I've spoken at Comic-Con, and it's probably one of the greatest jobs I'll ever have, and the greatest job any of us will have, and I'm proud to be here.
Awesome, that's good to hear. It's always interesting to hear how everyone got started, and probably never knew they were going to be in film when they were looking for a career. So our great panel, The Art of Location Management, which is such a great title, we know that it definitely, and we can certainly see from the Pechacuchas, or the Pikachu, as Kendry likes to call it, it absolutely is a creative pursuit. There's no Oscar for it yet, maybe after today. If you could all just sort of tell us from your point of view what makes the job an art versus a science, although I think at some point science does come into it.
So for me, it's just not knowing what's ever coming. I mean, I think we'd all agree that there's no real job description, because it's just different from whether you're abroad and, having to sort out accommodation that's in the middle of a desert and, making porter cabins accommodation, and just all the random requests that come with actors, or just being a creative from the very off and not having a script. Quite often now, there's a big difference for all of us in how we work, but we have common ground, and quite often I'll be on a project without a script, and it's becoming a very new thing in the UK to pitch ideas for a movie. So, for instance, going on to Mission Impossible, I scouted for 10 weeks, and you had to go and find locations to pitch the opening sequence of the film. So, to deny that we're part of the creative process is becoming increasingly harder, and it's getting us more momentum, especially with an organisation like the LMGI, because on 2 shows now I've ended up in the writer's room showing what can be done. And we're very much, we drive that first part of the ship. We're the link between what's possible and what's not, and we have to be creative to be able to be open to these possibilities and to sell these dreams of these directors to the outside world. So we're very much, what gets it off the ground in the first place.
Absolutely. Mike?
The job is all of those things. It's creative, it's art, it's science. I was talking to one of my assistants the other day, and we're going to film in the mountains in Nevada. And he said, "Mike, I can't get up there. The snow is blocking the road. They want to know what the temperature is going to be on top of the mountain, and all I know is it's 42 degrees at the base." But I said, "Donnie, the adiabatic lapse rate." He said, "What the hell are you talking about?" It's about the only thing I remember from college. Everybody, okay, I'm going to teach you something. For every 1,000 feet you go up in elevation, the temperature decreases 3.56 degrees. Okay, so remember that. You can pull it out of your head or pull it out of wherever else you want to pull it out.
We're getting into the science piece now. This is good. Everyone get your pen out.
And he didn't believe me. And then 15 minutes later, he said, "Yeah, adiabatic lapse rate." He sent me the Wikipedia page for the adiabatic lapse rate. I think I like all the parts of my job. And early on, it's the creative, a little bit of logistics. And then you move into mostly logistics because they found all the locations, and oh shit, we're going to throw the third act out. Let's get creative again. And I think I love that, because when things are just going along according to plan and you're just setting up the porta-johns and where the parking is, it gets a little boring. And I've been lucky enough to work on a bunch of crazy movies lately where they don't have a third act or a first act or a second act. And we are pitching ideas for the opening sequence or the end sequence. And I think we're getting a lot more recognition because we are being brought into the writer's room. We are being part of the creative discussions with the designer and the art directors and the director. And I think that with the technology that's out there now, working with visual effects, I worked on a show with Rino. Rino did 90% of the work up here. I did 10% of the work in the States. And I should have been on for the work that I had about 6 or 8 weeks. But because it was such a huge visual effects show, I was on for over a year scouting plates in Hawaii and on rooftops in San Francisco. And that's one thing that I've loved about the evolution of the business is, when I started 29, 30 years ago, there was no, visual effects wasn't even a job. There was somebody who did a matte painting maybe or took out some telephone poles. But now that part of the process, it drives a lot of movies. On Marvel films, I've worked on a few of them. You're in the scout van with the director, the producer, and the VFX team. And the VFX team, in some cases, is driving the production design more than the designer is. So that aspect has been a lot of fun for me. It's been great to learn how visual effects are used and how they do their job. And the technology is incredible. And so the people that say, oh, all you do is park the trucks and the shitters, I think we've got a lot of good ammunition to show that we do a hell of a lot more than that.
Yeah.
One more thing. I was afraid. I was afraid that I'd slip and swear, but after Russ and shit, fuck, it's great. I have all kinds of freedom.
There's a whole day ahead of you here, Mike, so just, stretch it out a bit.
It's kind of funny because when I was mentioning Park and Tilford and in the studio, when we shot there in '86, it was Airwolf, and Airwolf was the first show that they brought up here in terms of the industry sort of beginning to move forward. And Park and Tilford was just this crap hole. And
Shithole. You can say shithole.
Shithole. I'm sorry. Yeah. I try not to swear. Yeah. And it was funny because it was '86, and we came up with this brilliant idea. Like, why do we take pictures and paste them together? I mean, that takes up so much time, and the money and the development of the pictures and stuff was insanity. And so we bought a movie camera, $3,500, 1986, and we decided to go out and start shooting locations with movie cameras, right? We tried to sit the director down to look at stuff, and they couldn't do it. They just couldn't focus, right? So we were looking at that creative aspect in '86. We were looking at talking to writers, of course, about what we've seen, where we've been, and to incorporate those locations. So the creativity's just always been around there. And to me, one of the biggest things and the best feeling that I've ever had in this business is when you're in a real collaborative situation on a show with directors, producers, and you're valued, there's no better feeling. And it feels so fantastic.
As it should be.
Yeah.
100%.
So it's just if you're feeling that good, it's art.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I definitely think I come at it from the creative side, but I understand the scientific side too. I think the supervisors and the higher up location managers who are on much earlier in the process by default are going to have more of a creative input, working with designers, working with directors, producers earlier in the process. And I love that, but I love the scouting. I love presenting things as options. That being said, I think the scientific aspect and all the new things that you learn on the job are very interesting. So visual effects, case in point being mentioned there. Just an example, one of the things that I was always doing on Game of Thrones, I was doing geotechnical scans of quarries because we had castles perched on cliff tops and underneath cliffs, so we had worries about rockfall. So we did these aerial point clouds, which is basically a form of aerial LiDAR scanning in the 3D realm with a lot of very valuable 3D information. I approached the visual effects guys because I knew that they would love a 3D VFX machine early in the process because they were always behind on their previs process to get, as you say, get that underway very soon because the directors at some points in some action sequences are actually following VFX cues. And the locations department drove that. So our contractors scanned all the locations before VFX often was even on the job. If I was convinced enough and the producers were convinced enough it was going to be on the job, I would order the scans and then hand over the big OBJ files and post them onto VFX and drive them. So that's just an element of the science of the job and how that could develop. And I think it's interesting. I think it's the kind of job you can make your own because it takes so many different skill sets to be a good location manager, from the patience and the listening and the drive and the planning and the creative. Not everyone is going to be fantastic at everything. So I think that's the requirement for a balanced team around you too, because you have to delegate things to other people who are amazing at shouting or amazing at planning or are amazing at photography. Yeah. It's about everyone coming together to make the job what it is.
Yeah, that's a great point. Certainly about the team and team members having different expertise, 100%.
So about the creativity, I mean, the best part for me is that our job is to take the vision of the director, the word on the page, and make it manifest and come real. And as Rino put it, I've been lucky enough to be on shows where I've had a good relationship with the showrunners in the writing room. They're asking us to pitch ideas. And even further to that point, there's been a shift that we're being seen as a creative entity in the last couple of years. The last 3 shows I've been on, I was on it weeks before a designer ever started. It's me and a showrunner and a producer literally creating the world of a show, which is a great feeling because you're actually being respected as a creative force, not just, parking the shitters.
Yeah. So taking that creative piece for each of you, and I'm sure there's more than one, is there one particular project that sticks out in your mind that you're most proud of in terms of whether it was going to the far reaches for the location or somewhere that you got into or something that was just an amazing experience in terms of a project? And Robbie, I know you don't have any of those.
So I guess we all have those one jobs that come along and they don't come along often. For me, I worked on a movie called Edge of Tomorrow, and I was a newly pregnant location manager, so that was quite joyful because I stopped at every location and threw up, so that got me in the door, so that helped. So we launched our UK tax break on the back of that film. So we had lots of meetings with Boris Johnson, the mayor at the time, and the GLA, and Film London, etc. We had lots of kind of meetings on the ground, but it paved the way for a helicopter sequence in Trafalgar Square, which was the first and still the only sequence of its kind in London, because our roads are obviously very small, and the parameters of Trafalgar Square are, I think there was a 3-metre gap either side for the RAF Puma to land, so it was very specific to get this. And we had a lock-off which closed down all the roads. We closed, I think we closed 96 access roads and inlets, and we diverted 86 bus routes. It was a big, and we were dealing with all the embassies, so it was a big deal. And for 3 hours on a Sunday morning, we brought London to a standstill for this opening sequence, which was amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I think for me, it's hard to choose one because there's 3 or 4 that are sort of up there, but I still go back to Catch Me If You Can, which we filmed about 20 years ago, 19 years ago, something like that. Great production designer, Janine Opalwall. I'm not sure if anybody knows Janine, but she is as crazy as a shithouse rat. This woman is nuts. She's crazy, and I love her. There's nobody I'd rather work with. She's very quotable, eminently quotable. I've got pages and pages of Janine's quotes. But she really taught me. I was sort of new, not that new, but inexperienced, I think. In working with Janine, she really taught me how to scout. Not just going into the room and blasting a bunch of photographs, but reading the scene, trying to figure out where the characters should be, the camera angles. She goes into a building, she won't leave until she's opened every door, opened every window, gone into every single space. Because on that movie we had 285 sets, we had about 85 locations. We shot 4 or 5 days in New York, a few days in Montreal, a couple of days in Quebec City, and all the rest of it was Los Angeles. And we had, I think, 7 or 8 or 10 different cities that we shot in LA. So Janine really taught me how to scout, how to open every door, how to, and I hate this term, but think out of the box. Don't just look at a warehouse as a warehouse, but you can look at it as any number of other things. And we put together many locations, many days where we had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 locations. Sometimes we moved, 2 company moves a day, but most of the time we went into a building and shot 3 or 4 locations in that space. And one might be London, you go around the corner, and the next one is Paris, and then you go to Israel. So I'm really proud of that movie. I think it was shot beautifully, the design was fantastic, and we busted our asses on that, and I'm really proud of that. It's the one I'm on now is close to beating it for a lot of different reasons, but creatively, that's the one. That's the one.
Awesome movie.
I've got a few also like that, and kind of span my career. I think I've told this story before about Unforgiven, and I know I wasn't smart enough to know what was going on, but it was just so interesting because Clint Eastwood was the guy, and I found out he doesn't like horses. I go, what? This can't be true. Anyways, that show was, as I learned later or thought about it later, was a guy that was running a show himself. There was no studio involvement. Call sheets, any of that stuff never went to studios. We went out and worked and did the show, and it was all done. And if you can imagine that could happen today, it's impossible. That one person was the guy, and he probably still is the guy, but to make that kind of movie, no one knew what the budget was. Nobody said you couldn't or do or whatever. You just did whatever you did, and it all happened. And it was just an incredible, incredible feat, at that time. And I know I've never seen it again with that kind of power. The other place I shot was in the Yukon, and a place called the Cirque of the Unclimbables. It's a mountain range, and it's a massive effort to get in there with helicopters and float planes and all sorts of stuff. But that, when you stand there and there's only so many people have been in there, it changes your life. It's really incredible to stand there. That's what probably happens on Game of Thrones every day. Because when I see those locations, that's what I see in them. They're so spectacular. And the other thing is just happened the other day. Here in Vancouver, after 35 years, we shoot in Surrey, and we have this massive setup, 5 nights in the plaza and City Hall and the library and a hotel. And after 35 years working in this business, we're still able to do a massive setup like that here in Vancouver and in Surrey. And, James Monk is standing back there, and I have to tell you, we have people in the Lower Mainland like him that make this stuff happen, and it's fantastic still.
Shout out to James Monk is what we're saying. City of Surrey Film Liaison. Thank you, James.
So some of my favorite creative moments. One of them was on a very small feature film that I was doing with Mark Huffam. It was called Ghost Machine, quite a few years before Game of Thrones, and kind of a single-man operation, doing everything, scouting, ultimately doing bins, up at ridiculous hours. And in the original scouting, I read the script, and it called for a collection of farmhouses which were going to have to get destroyed. There's going to be a lot of broken glass. And it was a kind of a real sequence of literally kicking indoors and a fight and basically a pursuit. And the entire movie was based around that kind of feel. And I found some farmhouses and I kind of liked the feel of them and the look of them. But then I thought to myself, I had a mill up my sleeve. And I thought, I know a great place to do this. And it took a bit of courage because I was really just starting out the job. But I went to Mark Huffman, the director, and I said, can we not just do the whole thing in this mill instead? Like, let's not do the farmhouses. And I thought, I'm going to get fired in 3, 2, 1. And they said, show us some pictures. And they loved it. And the whole sequence got changed. It got rewritten. It got tweaked because the location drove the whole process. And at that kind of level of medium to lower budget, it's everything. If you get a great place to go and hang out and knock off as much stuff as possible, that's a huge box ticked, and you've steered the production in that direction. Years later, one of my best moments would have been scouting for Dragonstone, which was season 7, and I did every beach and every seaward-facing cliff on the island of Ireland, which took me 11 days to drive around, and I jogged it. And I did a massive Google Earth survey first of A to B, B to C, C to D, ending with white wine and oysters every day, which was very important. Yeah. And I scouted, must have been about 60 different great things, and ended up with it within an hour of Belfast. The great thing was that there were other scouts in Spain. We were all collaborating, and my friend Tate Arias, he did the stairs and the beach in Zumaya, and I did all the top stuff. Yeah. So it was great to be part of an international coordinated effort and to find it in so close to Belfast here.
Great stories. Yes.
I mean, ultimately, we're asked to try to find the impossible and make it happen, and we've all got stories. And one of the ones that I remember the most is I was an assistant at the time in a little film called Resident Evil 6, I think. We needed to do a scene with a helicopter on a beach. We don't see the helicopter fly. It's on a beach. There's a tree. The director loves this tree we saw in a provincial park off of Lake Ontario, about 3 hours out of town. And permits are in, conversations in. All of a sudden, halfway through, about 6 weeks before we need to shoot it, the park ranger goes, "Oh, you can't land a helicopter here." I'm like, what? We've been talking about this from the beginning. He goes, "Oh, I just never told you. There's a part of the Parks Act says you can't land a helicopter on this beach. Sorry, you can't do it. You gotta go away somewhere else." So we have to go back, and the director's like, "No, I love this tree. And nothing special about it. I love this tree. I want to shoot here or anywhere else." And we were working for a producer who basically said, "We have to make it happen." And went back to the parks superintendent, went to the province. "Nope, the Parks Act says." And my manager just looks at me and goes, "We're screwed." He points to me and goes, "You got to figure this out." So before I was living the dream in my parents' basement, I was a history student. And the only benefit of my degree was research skills. So I literally sat down and tore through the Province of Ontario Parks Act of 1986, line by line, to look for a loophole, which I found. We had to petition the Minister of the Environment to change one word. Luckily, I went to school with her kid. We knew where she lived. Her staff wouldn't answer the phone because you can't directly talk to the minister, it goes through staff. Knowing where she lived, we left notes in her mailbox. Found friends of hers that I think it was a city councilor who was going to a convention with her, who we coached on what to say on an hour drive. She was trapped with her in the car. Tried everything. Not a peep. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from the park superintendent. "I don't know what the fuck you did. You're good to go." And he forwarded us a line item. So actually, we had the law changed. Wow. For a 2-day window, you could land a helicopter on a beach, and it's enshrined in the act. I actually have it saved. It literally taught me that it's the most bizarre. We could change laws. I haven't done a federal one yet. I haven't been lucky enough to do that, but that was probably the coolest thing I've ever done.
Those are all amazing stories, and I'm sure you guys all have a lot more. I'm going to just go off a little script here because we have an opportunity, because we have so many film commissioners from across Canada here with us, and just ask you guys, how you work in each of your jurisdictions with film commissions, film offices, and the importance of those relationships, particularly when things like, sounds like you guys did it, where you're reaching out to other provincial or state offices and the people that are behind those desks and answer the phone.
This is a controversial one for us, so I'll be diplomatic. In the UK, in London, particularly, the location, because it's so busy, location managers have almost kind of outgrown the use of a film commission. We have a very small film commission, and they are led by some wonderful people, but it's very much more a business than it's kind of disconnected with the work on the ground. So a lot of our problem solving just comes from us internally, really. But we have enough relationships that's happened. But because we are so busy and we have different boroughs, different areas, we have organisations that run filming on behalf of council. So it's all private, but they have almost become our voice. So they would be the ones that you would turn to if you really needed to, and they have their own kind of preferred list of who can do what in what areas because of, certain jurisdictions. So it's very much a location manager led rather than a film commission or institution led.
All right, that's different.
It's a hard question because every film commission is different.
Yeah.
Some folks are very experienced, very positive. Some are not very experienced, not very helpful. It's amazing to me that there are a few film commissions I've worked with, and they really don't want to help. It's like, what are you doing here? How could you be in this position if you don't want to help us solve these problems? I've just found that the best tack to take with film commissions from Los Angeles to New York to Budapest to wherever is just go in with as much information as you have. Ask for forgiveness before you screw things up because somebody's going to park in the wrong place or knock the fire hydrant over at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had one of those. I got home from work one day, turned on the news early. I got home early, 6 o'clock, turned on the news, and there in Manhattan Beach, there's a 40-foot geyser of water going, holy shit, that's the camera truck. The camera. Manhattan Beach was not the most film-friendly city up to that point, and after that, they became very, very unfriendly. So anyway, to me, it's just give them as much information as you can. Be as flexible as you can, because even though yes, what I'm doing is the most important thing in the world, they've got 50 more of me, right in front and right in back of me with the same crazy requests. So I've learned to be patient. It's hard sometimes because our time frames are so short. But I don't know how we do our job sometimes. I don't know how a lot of film commissioners do their jobs when they've got so many of us asking for all these crazy things. So my film commissions everywhere have my undying respect. I appreciate what they do. It's sort of a thankless job sometimes, especially when you're a film commissioner in an area where the folks really don't love to have filming in their neighborhoods. So I just try to be as patient as I can, which is very difficult for me because I'm Sicilian.
You're right, that is a really difficult question. I know from working here for 35 years that we've worked extremely hard to have policies put in place, and everything's fantastic, and then there's a regime change of somebody, and we're back to square one. So it's very disheartening a lot of times, and things that we did in the past. I can say I did this, and we used to do all that in that place, and now it doesn't work anymore. So I just always found that with my experience, what I try to do is help a commissioner or a film liaison, whoever it is, work through things perhaps that maybe I'm better at in terms of diplomacy or politics or whatever, and try to work it through. I'm assuming, like everywhere, we're all human beings and there's different types, and I think the thing is, if you don't have people from the top saying, this is what we want to do, this is how we do it, and I want everyone to make it work, there's always going to be little problems happen along the way. So I'll bring up James Monk again last week, and for a guy like that, you know, he's with us. We solve problems immediately. He puts himself out on a limb. I think that's James, and I think he also knows that he's got the top of the heap behind him, so he can make those decisions. So it's an incredibly tough job. I mean, I just think what we have to do. I mean, my worst nightmare all the time is I'm the guy that has to say no to producers, directors. Tough job. So I'm not sure how you go to the mayor that you have no relationship with and say something like this, right? So it's a very tough job, and it's just, we have to work together and just have to cultivate these relationships so that we all, you know, can help each other through our difficulties.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I think from the Northern Irish perspective that NI Screen are a very active, very progressive film commission. They were instrumental in getting HBO and Game of Thrones into Belfast. They were really driving force towards the tax credit being implemented. On a kind of nuts and bolts daily interaction with them, it's a partnership. You know, as a show like Game of Thrones develops and you come across new problems which maybe other shows haven't got to yet, I always felt like I could ring a personal mobile number at midnight and they would answer and we'd start talking about it. Some nuts and bolts things that we had on the show which I really needed their help from, which I kind of drove but brought them into, would have been the drone problem. So we had 27 drones above our sets in season 7. Literally separate occasions. We had flights above one of our quarries just missing drones. I was getting calls from air traffic control saying, one of your drones has almost fucked up a Ryanair flight. And I was like, that's not us, that's too high. That's someone watching us do drone filming much further down below. So we put together this kind of task force, and I kind of got Warner Media involved. Our sort of sister security company came in, and we got the chief pilot of Belfast International Airport, City Airport. We got people involved in the legislation to see what could we do. And NI Screen was great. They were in those meetings. And because it is a growing problem that other productions are going to face. And it's what do you do when you have a drone above you? So we tried all sorts of avenues like NOTAMs, notice to airmen, about what you're doing, which might spook the horses if a drone was above, or action sequences, or choreographed stunts and explosions. We made the safety case, and we kind of almost found a way around it. The avid drone people just did it anyway, and for that we had to have police air support ultimately. But NI Screen was very instrumental and very helpful.
It really is about, as everyone in the room knows, about that relationship, right, and the trust, and being able to pick up the phone and call at 3 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night or whatever it may be. And I think every one of the film offices and film commissioners here do that, which is amazing. And it's obviously really is a huge part of, for us in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland, why we've been so successful and be able to have 50 plus shows for the last few years running. It certainly makes a massive difference in terms of being able to have those relationships. So.
You're right. I mean, we're the bridge between production and the real world. And it's the film commissioners and the local film offices that are almost a partner in this with us to make sure that we can get what we want still within the confines of the rules and making sure the citizenry is involved. And it really is. It's a total partnership, and you're hearing it from all the examples here. And it's the same for us.
It's awesome. And we're going to have a great panel about that very topic later. Are you wanting to go to questions, Hans? Yeah. So we're going to throw it out to anyone that might have a question for all of these fabulous people. Phil Donahue is coming through the... Kathleen, are you coming for a question, or are you just... Oh.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Just on the
Absolutely.
back of the last thing. As you were saying, it always comes down to the person. So for us, we, as a studio, we'd had historical problems with our film commissions. Yeah. And they just never really spoke to us. It wasn't, it just kind of escalated for years, and it was passed down. And
it was after David left, obviously.
No, it was before David left. So when David started, he just picked up the phone and, and he canvassed and just come around and said, look, I know there is fundamental issues, but what can we do? And that's part of it. And he kind of really led to a massive change. And now it's got a hell of a lot better, but it really just does depend on the person. It's such a huge deal. And last night I really kind of saw just how well you all get on, and it's really a model that we should be looking to.
Well, we can come visit you guys and show you how we do it. I think everyone...
Come, please do. It's why David's left.
Could I just say hi to everyone, first of all, from the back. I'm Phil Donahue. Now's the time, because we're going to have these folks, and they have talked about the art of all this. Now's your time and chance to nerd out and ask specifically Georgette and Robbie, because it's their first time here with us, about Game of Thrones, which I know is a question that everyone has. There's got to be one nerd in here that's got a question. They don't want to stick their neck out, or Georgette, and just have a go at them. So if anyone's got questions, now's the time. Please, really?
Woo!
No questions. Here we go.
It is for Robbie, because I'm a Game of Thrones nerd. So, and it does relate, though, to how we do film here in BC, I believe, which is that there's a lot of productions coming from all over the world using us as a location. And I just wanted to know, from your experience and then the 10 years you've been on the show, how has that evolved in Ireland to cater more towards people coming from outside, and how do you kind of navigate all those different personalities who all do things in different ways, and then unify that into one kind of work style in where you guys do business?
Thanks for the question. So you're talking about international crew and turnover and a lot of different flux in terms of the talent that's coming in. I think with episodic TV, there's always a strong template and structure that has to be put in place, because you don't really have the luxury of time. You've got your setup time, you've got your contracts and deals, and literally things are being built very, very quickly, very early in the process, because 12 weeks later, you're starting to film. So I think a strong production that knows what it is, that establishes kind of ground rules as to how it works, is really important. I also think it's really important to have a skeleton crew of some key figures for continuity, because you can have people coming and going. I mean, we lost our whole art department after 3-4 years, but the continuity in other departments like location, who understood how to do massive overall prep shoot strike schedules, for example, we just picked up the slack and we helped them into it, and they were fantastic. But I think you've got to keep the experienced folks, those key pivotal positions. Also with directors, we obviously had a lot of people coming back and doing, year on year on year, and that helps, because there are efficiencies when people start to understand your tech recce process and your scouting process, and when a location really needs to be on that estate, because for scheduling reasons, guys, we've got to make this work, versus I want your next 5 options, because sometimes you just cannot squeeze that in. So I think it's, again, strong production, strong template, and some key staff staying as long as possible. And then you just have to make it happen, and people do actually click into shape. I think once the show has a sort of a history and it's achieving something, maybe by season 2, 3, 4, people were happy to just bend into shape and do it the Game of Thrones way, which is different. I hope that helps.
Oh, and there's one up here too after.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a municipal film coordinator, I guess, liaison. And my question is, thank you for the panel. Municipalities and cities, they're not the fastest moving organizations in terms of the way that we develop policies and plans. And I'm wondering if you can comment on what are the trends that we should know about, because some of what you guys talk about is so fascinating, but sometimes it's Greek. And so for us, what is it that we should be thinking about from the municipal end that we can try and get ahead of to support you, those trends?
John doesn't live here, so he can say whatever he wants. No.
I think, what's really strange today, of course, is that there's 50, shows shooting here. So I think that's the new trend. And the new trend means, and what the new trend means to producers, directors, is that they don't care there's 50 shows shooting here. They want the same stuff, same time, same schedule, fast now, answered. And the assumption that we will guarantee, they don't even ask anymore, they just assume these locations that we've looked at, we're getting. There's not going to be any issue. So I think for the municipalities, they have to understand the position we're in a lot of times, that even though there's 50 shows shooting, and nowadays we're negotiating with other location managers to say, where are you going, what are you doing, how are we doing it, can we take it, can you, all that stuff is a new level of negotiations that we have. But obviously the municipality is going to be caught in the same thing. They're going to have 15 location managers looking at all these. So anything we can do in order to be able to facilitate and streamline how we make that decision, who's going to be there and can get it, I guess, is probably the trend that I'm thinking is going on now. We just don't have that luxury of time. And I have to stress, the director, the AD, they want it, and they think that they're the only show in town, and they're not interested in us telling them, well, there's 50 shows here, and they don't even listen. So somehow we have to work better at it and streamline it and figure out how to do it.
Catherine, did you have a question?
Hey, I'm Catherine. My question is for everyone up there. It's kind of just a curiosity thing. I wanted to know who's the most interesting person that you've met through your work, whether it was like an actor or a producer or a random person who lived in a house in the woods. I just want to see on your path in your career, who's the most interesting person you've ever met.
Besides all of us here today, of course.
Maybelle Eccles-Durr was, this was 2000. I was working on a movie called Girl Interrupted. I think it was around 2000. We wanted a pharmacy that had an old-fashioned soda fountain. We're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, middle of Pennsyltucky, middle of nowhere. And where are you going to find a 1920s, 30s period pharmacy with a soda fountain? Maybelle Eccles-Durr is the first female pharmacist in the state of Pennsylvania, got her pharmacy license, I think, in 1929. She hadn't been working as she was a compounding pharmacist. So she hadn't been working for probably 5 or 6 years. She retired when she was in her 80s. But her father had passed down to her a soda fountain, a drugstore with a soda fountain that hadn't been touched with any renovations. I mean, the light fixtures, the wire, everything was old. I mean, Maybelle lived in the back of the pharmacy, little apartment, and she didn't want anything to do with filming. She wanted nothing to do with it. So and it was the only place within 1 billion miles that we could shoot this. We didn't have the money to build it. So I spent probably 3 afternoons a week with Maybelle Eccles-Durr, sitting, drinking tea, listening to her stories. And she said, "You're going to keep coming here until you break me, right?" I said, "Maybelle, it's going to be so much easier if you just say yes." About 3 weeks later, another 10 or 12 or 15 trips. We drink tea, and she'd tell stories, and she'd wander off into wherever her mind was. She was still fairly sharp, but boy, sometimes she took some really divergent paths. But Maybelle, and I've worked with some great directors and producers, but Maybelle is probably the most interesting person I've met in 30 years of doing this. I'll never forget that old coot. She was something else.
So for me, it was Lord Willoughby. We were shooting out in Yorkshire at a big kind of grand estate, and he'd come and he'd go, and he had groundsmen, and this was on a film called The Young Victoria. And he just rocked up one day with all the dogs, and he said, come on, I'll give you the private tour. So we went into the kind of the back quarters that nobody could go into, and on the wall were so many pictures of his ancestors. And I said, "Oh, this is wonderful." I said, "I'd love to have all my ancestors on a wall like that. And in the far corner was a picture of an old gardener with a big barrel of dirt. And he said, "Oh, look, there's one of yours." Yeah, it's true. But then we went into a secret room and he had a private Monet collection, which was just, this house was completely open to, anybody could just get in there. There was no security. It was so lax. And he had 6 or 7 Monets, and I saw his private collection, which you'd never get to do, so.
That's very funny.
I met this great woman. We were shooting in Fort Macleod, Alberta, and we were doing a white supremacist show then, and it must have been in late 80s. Tom Berenger and Deborah Winger were in it, and all the white, the Ku Klux Klan, were burning crosses, we were, chasing people and killing them, and out of the blue, and this place is in the middle of nowhere, if you know Alberta, and I meet a woman, and she's riding her horse, and she has a rifle, and she's riding her perimeter of her property, and I just happened to be on the edge of it, and she stopped and was going to shoot me. And I told her what we were doing, we were talking about, and anyway, she got off her horse, we started talking, and I got to know her. She invited me to her house, and I got to know her because she was from Chicago. Her father was the mayor, and I can't remember what era that was, in the 40s, maybe 50s, and she married a black man, and she had to move out of the U.S. and had to move to Canada. And she owned this property that she vigorously defended. She rode the boundary every day with this rifle, and anybody that came near it, she'd shoot. And I got to know her, and she told me some pretty interesting stories just about her life in Chicago and her situation, how it all happened. It's just like, it's you're in a field in Fort Macleod. I mean, it's just insanity to be able to just never think that would ever, that you'd meet somebody like that and what their story would be. And that's the great thing about this job. We get to meet those types.
I think that's what everyone has been there before, where you're in this place. Yeah, exactly.
I've got a couple of quick ones. So we had to build this castle over a river with a drawbridge landing in a new property with people that I hadn't done a deal with before. And it was one of those weird timings when the concept and the toing and froing and what location we were going to use, I didn't want to approach them, so they got a sense of the money. So I was kind of holding back, and I was waiting, and it was on, off, and then all of a sudden, like, things get activated, construction wants to be in and building, and everyone's like, yeah, we're doing it. Wasn't up to just before that. So I took a drive to go and check out the family, and I got near the house, and there was a lovely old Irish guy in a sort of a dirty blazer and a proper Irish cap on. And I stopped, and he came up to me before I even got a chance to get out of the car, and I said, "Hi, how you doing? We are just over the road there, and you've seen our buildings. We'd really like to extend the castle, come over the river Bann, and then use the field for a really big set." And he went, "Ah?" And then I said, "Oh, shit, right. So we'd love to do some filming in your field. There's money involved. I'd love to come and talk to you about the plan. It's only just been hatched." And he went, "Fuck off." And we were totally committed. We were in, things had just, the way the whole domino effect of it was time to start building had happened, I had to get a yes. So I drove away to go and have a quiet coffee and think things through. Eventually I came back, got his family, got them, sat them down. There was a few generations below, got chatting. He walked in later on and saw me and was like, "Ugh," and went up the stairs. That was one. The other one was my constant scouting partner, Chris Newman, who was a producer on Game of Thrones. Usually I would do a few layers of scouting, get my best options together, present them. Chris and or art department and or Bernie would join me at a point. And Chris, because he was a scheduling guy, would always be spitting out little sections of kind of illogical sentences where he would correct himself in the middle of the sentence and move on to the next problem. And on that Dragonstone Scout I mentioned, where we went A to B, B to C, we did that whole thing again because Chris liked the pictures, so he rang me and said, I want to do the whole thing with you. And I kid you not, from probably Belfast all the way around through Donegal, it was a solid stream of, if I move Tyrion, that would really fuck me up with the green screen split, but then that ruins Arya, and then there's the daylight hours, but then we don't have the right horses in Iceland. So I'm going to be really, really screwed here unless we work something out. But what do you think about the other one which isn't split? And I'd be like, whoa, I'm trying not to crash the car here, dude. And that was Chris the whole way around Ireland. And he's an absolute gem of a man and encyclopedic film knowledge and a great scheduler, great talent.
I mean, I've been lucky enough, and we all have, to meet tons of people, good or bad, and it's one of the worst, not the worst, the one that's most memorable is I was doing a TV movie, I think for ABC, about a woman named Jennifer Estes who passed away of ALS and started a whole foundation. So we needed a house for, I think, about 6 weeks, and we found one and made a deal with the wife, and the husband got involved. And because at the time, this is probably about 10 or 15 years ago, stem cells was a relatively new thing, and the story had a lot to do with stem cell research. The husband all of a sudden magically found some sort of religious problems with what we were doing. Really, he was trying to chisel us for more money. Every other day, he would find a reason he wanted more and more and more. And it got to a point where we stopped wanting to accommodate him and said, look, this is our final offer. If you don't like it, we've got other options, we'll go. And he called us on it, so we did. We gave the director the choice of houses, and he picked another one. Guess where it was? Right across the street. Right across the street. For 6 weeks, all we saw is this husband and wife in the window flipping us the bird every day.
That was also a good one.
One more question. Sorry, Martin. One
Okay,
more
yeah.
question right here.
There's been tremendous growth in the industry around the world. Everybody's experiencing the same thing. But for example, in British Columbia, the industry's grown in the last 20 years by a factor of 7. And the film commissions and the liaisons, the resources that are available to them, have not grown at all in the same size. So my question is, does it make sense to anybody here that Bran Stark ended up as King of Westeros?
And that's Pete Mitchell, a former BC film commissioner, making that crack. One more question, sorry, from right here, last one.
Good afternoon, thank you. Joan Miller, Vancouver Island North Film Commission. I have a question about climate change. We get asked frequently to predict if there's going to be snow or foliage or ice or smoke or fire. I want to know from your experience, truly, is climate change affecting the job that you're doing? And how do you deal with things when you can't really predict them because there's so much change?
Well, I'm from the UK, so our weather is never predictable. So to be, for us, it's not really factored in with climate change because they're always expecting that it's going to change. So I don't think it's really they haven't connected the two yet. So it's not really for us.
The movie I'm on now, we've gotten hammered because they always go to the location department. Look, I'm a frickin' meteorologist, right? I look at the same pages you look at, historical weather. But all of a sudden, I have to be an expert. But we're in a lot of different. We're from high desert to low desert to the Cascades. We're out in the ocean on aircraft carriers, and so weather's the big thing for us. We're flying planes. You can't fly planes in crappy weather at low elevations, and it's become a problem. We have had to massively change our shooting schedule, and I'm working with the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Navy, as I've learned, revolves around aircraft carriers and jets. And we had a number of shots scheduled for the deserts in Nevada, and we wanted to look like hot summer. It's historically hot summer by April. They've got more frickin' snow than the Cascades have now. the Cascades, where we anticipated filming well into June with a lot of snow up in the mountains. We had a lot of snow until about 6 weeks ago, and then it all went away. So we shot a week ago, 10 days ago. We tried to shoot. We had 7 days scheduled. We actually shot 3 days because we're fogged in a couple of times, and then when the fog lifted, it's like, where'd the snow go? So we'll be back there probably next year. Can't predict it. I mean, we're rolling the dice. We had a sailing sequence, had an expert marine coordinator. Yep. Off of Long Beach in October, you're going to have 15, 18 knot winds. No problem at all. Get out there, three knot winds. We're out there for 3 days, no wind. So I think climate change is affecting how we work. We just can't predict it. We don't know. You don't know what to do. There's no way to predict it. You just have to make a plan, stick with it as best you can, and you bob and weave. And if you're on a show that has the time and the money, you'll come back later, or come back next year, or come back whenever. But for the most part, you're just rolling the dice and trying to get through.
I imagine, I was just thinking about it last year, nowadays with all the fires, I mean, I think we can begin to assume now that there's a pattern happening, and I'm assuming we have to warn people now that they're coming to Vancouver that there's going to be this specific period where there's going to be a ton of smoke. I know last year, like from our offices, we couldn't see, a couple blocks away of the buildings. I have no idea. Everybody was shooting here. I never did hear from anybody if that caused a problem or how shows dealt with it. I have no idea. Maybe somebody can tell me if they did or didn't. But those are in order to protect ourselves as locations people, we're always trying to give out as much information in terms of snow, because of course it's not going to snow that year. You said it was going to snow, and they're always blaming us. So, but I think climate change, fires, I think it's a new thing we have to deal with, and I'm not sure how we deal with it.
We're going to have hotter hots, colder colds, wetter wets, and drier dries. And that's what climate change is, and it's just reality.
Yeah. I mean, we have fairly consistently rainy weather in Northern Ireland, but that being said, I have to say we've had some absolutely unholy hot summers recently, to the point where I now kind of feel like August, September is going to be hot, very hot. And weirdly, that means less heaters and more air conditioners for the first time. We've had water shortages, water restrictions in Ireland. And for a country that is that green, that is unbelievable. You can't water your garden. You can't have a paddling pool. It's incredible to believe that. The other one that I've noticed as well is usually I'd have a gritting allowance in. You'd be linked to an automatic service that if it goes anywhere near zero, automatically they would grit areas around you. And, the last 3 or 4 years, we didn't use any of it, which is interesting because we've shot through most of the winters. We have put our own salt down on occasion, but that kind of very, very sort of -8, -9 Belfast, I haven't seen for a very long time.
Wow. John?
Yeah, so what Mike said is it's becoming progressively worse. It's hard to predict. Summers are going to be extremely hot, and then if anyone's ever been to Ontario, it gets bloody humid, like unbearably humid. And of course, what do they want to shoot in the summer? Christmas movies. The Hallmark curse.
Do you guys have a gazebo?
Yes. You have to enter in a gazebo.
We have one in Maple Ridge, just in case you have ever watched a Hallmark movie.
Oh no, we have the curse of that too. And it's hard because of course then they ask you when's it going to snow. I don't know. The weather forecast is the same one I see. When's it going to turn green? We've had that recently because the show I'm doing now for Netflix takes place in January and February. We can't look out windows because everything's green and they keep getting mad at us for that. Yeah. Like, you chose to come here. By the way, the show takes place in New York, and my favorite word is, if you're going to be shooting this in New York, where would you shoot this? It's just as green there. Yeah. But it's the rise of air conditioning, which then puts stress on the power grid and more fuel is being burned. It's a slow fight it's becoming a huge problem. It's not much we can do about it. We're slaves to the schedule, but You can't always go to Range
creative
Rover.
solutions, because that's what you guys do. Okay, I think we're wrapping up here, so huge thanks to the fantastic panel we have and to all of you.